Welcome to In Such a Time, conversations on Jewish life, leadership, and meaning. Each week, Rabbis Jonathan Jaffe and Londy explore the moments, questions, and ideas that shape who we are and who we aspire to be. And now, for this week's conversation.
Hi, and welcome to the In Such a Time podcast. Today is Tuesday, August 5th. Happy to be here as always with Rabbi Londy. And today we're going to be taking on a bit of a machloket b'shem shemayim. That is a disagreement discussion for the sake of heaven. And I think that this is exactly what this podcast platform is for, is that you and I can take a chance to talk about some of the discussions that we have offline and bring our congregation to that as well. And this is something that we talk about quite often and something that we hold passion for. And so today's topic is about politics on the Bima. Yeah. And to what degree should we as clergy be advocating for political positions from the seat of the Bima or from our authority as rabbis? And so maybe we'll just start and talk a little bit about where we're coming from with this, and maybe where does the passion for this come from for you?
Thank you for making space for us to talk about this. And I'm really excited that we are going to be speaking about this in a way that our community can have some access to, because often behind the scenes, I come into the office or less huffing and puffing. You're smiling, waiting for me to.
Tired.
You're tired. You're waiting for whatever huff and puff is coming. And then we'll start talking about an issue, and whether it's Israel, whether it's immigration, whether it's what's going on in democracy in Israel and in America. And you and I don't always see eye to eye on all these subjects. And what's so beautiful about that is that we have these discussions. They sometimes get heated, but they're very passionate intellectually in their nature. But we also go back to our offices, and I feel that we are more connected and have a better working relationship and a better rabbinical relationship after that, and are not further apart from one another.
Absolutely.
And that is sacred. And one of the reasons that we wanted to bring this to our community is because we are living in such divisive times where people cannot talk about politics without ending friendships. That feels crazy, that we live in a society where we're all in our own silos and we're reading the media that we want to have access to, and we're not open to other people's opinions. And I'm seeing how this flows from relationships between neighbors, relationships between rabbis, relationships in families, specifically between different generations. And I think that we've been talking about what is our role in terms of bringing up certain political issues on the Bima. And I struggle with this because on the one hand, I really agree with your conclusion that we've talked about many times, is that we have to put community and connection before everything. This is a space that should be a place where people can come together as neighbors, as fellow Jews, and we need to protect that at all costs. And on the other hand, there's so much going on in our world right now that when we don't speak about the various issues that are happening, I feel like it's a lost opportunity. And I feel like it's not even responsible as someone who has a leadership role in a community to not talk about certain issues that I know people are thinking about. And so I'm there. I'm sitting in that thinking, what is the role of what politics should be from the Bima in our community? I certainly engage in political discussions with people on a one-on-one basis, which feels fine and safe. But on the other hand, when we do have a platform and there are things that are going on in the world, including immigration issues, ICE, trucks driving around Mount Kisco, which is really close to here, I feel like it's a lost opportunity, and it's not just a lost opportunity. I feel like I have a moral responsibility to speak about certain issues that we're seeing face to face. So that's my starting point with this. Where are you at?
Well, first of all, I really honor what you're saying, and I think that ultimately our rabbinate has to come from an authenticity as to what is stirring within us, and that these are things that are stirring within you, within me, that we should be willing to talk about and have a space to deal with these things. So first of all, I appreciate it. I certainly hope as though you haven't felt as though you've been, sort of muzzled to speak your truth when it comes to our congregation. Um, you're right. I come from a perspective of, first of all, humility, that I realize that very often I don't know everything about every subject. And what I do know comes from the fact that I am well steeped, couched in Torah, Jewish tradition, Chazal, the rabbinic wisdom, and I can bring that to bear, but that I don't necessarily know more than our congregate about various issues. And the second one, I think you brought this up very well, is that politics has so pervasively infected every aspect of our lives, um, that for me, I don't think people are thinking to themselves, I wish that politics was more present in more of the things I did in my life. I think they probably think less. I was mentioning to you that there was a study that came out this week from Wellesley College that um, only 8% of friendships in America are between people of different political parties. 8%. I think that we live in a rather purple area, and I think that the issues of Israel and anti-Semitism have moved some from the deep blue to the lighter blue, shall we say, um, and that we have to be very careful that all of them feel welcome and included in our synagogue, and not to be made to feel as though they are a bad Jew because they disagree with us on a political topic. And here I'll give you a very easy, stark example. I think I mentioned to you when my parents first moved to Hawaii, they were looking at synagogue, and the Reform synagogue had a senior rabbi who was very much an advocate for Nixon and for the Vietnam War,
Whoa.
and spoke at length on the Bema in support of the Vietnam War and in support of Nixon. And my parents did not join the synagogue because they found that to be an uncomfortable place for them. And eventually, that rabbi was moved onwards, largely due to his political views. And my parents did join that synagogue at a later time. I'm not saying politics free. I'm just saying that we should be very careful when speaking about current issues from the Bema. We have to be careful what we know and what we don't know. We have to be careful about where our community is on this. There are certain things, like I would say, for example, some of the immigration issues you bring up, where I think there would be a large swath of agreement within our community, and certain things that are going to be much more divisive. I'm not even saying that we should avoid the divisiveness. I'm just saying that we should practice some humility. And here again, I'll give another example. Earlier on in my time here at Bethel, there was the huge debate over the nuclear agreement with Iran. And suddenly rabbis were supposed to know something about centrifuges and percent enrichment and things that I was completely untrained to talk about. And so we brought in we did a 3-part series with someone who was for the agreement, someone who was against the agreement, and then one for us more to talk amongst ourselves. And for me, that was a way for us to engage in an issue without being heavy-handed or dogmatic as though we know what is absolutely right. And so I would like us to be able to speak to political issues. I just think we'd be very careful to make sure that we remain inclusive while doing so.
I really respect and agree with so much of what you've said. However,
Please.
I think that one of the privileges that we have as rabbis is that we have a lot of devoted time to thinking about like big issues. Like these are discussions that we're having with other rabbinic colleagues. This is kind of some of our training as well, to think and to process, and then to have some kind of product where we help our community within form of sermon or our writing to kind of digest issues that are happening in the world. I think that was the purpose of sermons for a long time, is to help the community, or to work together as a community, process something that's happening. And I definitely am allergic to anybody who thinks that they know what is right. That doesn't make any sense to me as a human being. We always have something to learn. there's so much information that we don't have about so many of the issues that are happening. However, I think that it's important that we don't ignore gut feelings of when something feels off. And I think that it's important that we also verbalize it. When something in our society feels off, like we cannot miss the opportunity to speak about the moments in our time. Like Torah has to be relevant to what's happening today. We can't only sit in rabbinic literature and think that anyone's going to get anything out of it. I'm sure that many people will, but the whole point of Torah was for it to develop and for us to be reflective about our current times. Like the name of our podcast is In Such a Time. Like we're going back to the reference from Megillat Esther, where in Megillat Esther it references like in such a time as this, like this time where the Jewish people are living in the diaspora in dealing with the impending threat of annihilation. And I'm not suggesting that we're in the same kind of dynamic right now, but we are in a crossroads moment in history. I think that most experts would agree that something is happening that has never happened before. And I think that we have to be open to having public conversations about that. And I know that so much of the work that we're doing as a community is facilitating closeness, but also working towards having those bigger discussions. But I just feel such a weight of history on my shoulder of being a person, being a Jew that doesn't ignore the plight of what's going on in the world. I think I'm also informed by the fact that I became a rabbi in Israel, and the Reform movement in Israel is a political movement.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what the American Reform Rabbinate is.
Right.
I mean,
Because there's no separation of church and state.
Right. There is no separation of church and state or of synagogue and state in Israel. And so it is a political movement in so many ways. So my North Star in many ways has been like, if you see a problem, you need to be part of that solution. And so I think that's maybe part of the learning of being here is that we have to be very, very careful in this climate of what we say and how we say it. That doesn't mean that we don't say it at all.
I think what I'm hearing from you, it dovetails very much with advice that I got earlier in my career, and that's the juxtaposition of the prophet and the pastor.
Absolutely.
That is, that's the pastor is there to comfort, to make someone feel good about themselves or help them in time of need. And the prophet is there to cajole the people and tell them everything they're doing wrong and what exactly they need to change. I remember learning early in my career that it's really easy to always be the prophet, to always be yelling at your congregation and telling them what they're doing wrong. Probably won't last that long as a rabbi. It's really easy to always be the pastor and just to make people feel comfortable all the time. The hard part and the balance is to try to go somewhere in between. That sometimes you got to pull on one string or the other. And you have to know when to be the prophet and when to be the pastor. And perhaps really this discussion is about that equilibrium. And do we need to adjust slightly here at the synagogue between the profiting and the pastoring here? Now, I would argue that it's not as though we are politics or values free here at the synagogue. A lot of the things that we do by our operations, the fact that not only do we have an inclusivity statement and a flag on the front of our building as you come in, along with the statement of standing with Israel, but that we proudly honor, co-officiate at same-sex weddings, that we bring in anyone from every background here to the synagogue. We've partnered with neighborhood organizations like Neighbors Link and such. It's not as though we are values free. I think we're talking specifically here about political advocacy and around what are the specific agenda, what are the specific policies that we want to champion here at the synagogue. And here, this is why it's a little bit tougher for me. And this goes to a larger conversation we were discussing before. What are Jewish values? And what specific policies can we say, because we're Jewish, we have to believe this, right? I think broadly, I thought of a couple here. What are things we can say that this is a Jewish value? I think a Jewish value is that life is sacred. I think the Torah emphasizes that again and again. I think caring for the vulnerable is a huge Jewish value. I think the fact that words matter is a big, big Jewish value.
Actions equally matter.
Yeah, but I think people assume that often, but they don't realize how much words matter as well. Words have the power to create and destroy.
I love
in the
that.
Torah.
Yeah.
I think the idea that we are in a social contract, and that social contract is based upon obligation and rules that sometimes we have to curb our personal freedom in order to allow for greater engagement, participation for all. I think that's very much a Jewish value. Now, take, for example, something like immigration. Okay, so we believe that we should care for the vulnerable. But what specific piece of legislation does that mean that we should support? Should we be saying that because we're Jewish, that those who are undocumented individuals should be given a driver's license? I don't know. Like, you could take that either way. That I don't know if Judaism has a conclusive argument on either side. And again, I play devil's advocate with myself. I know that there were rabbis in the South in the 1840s who were citing the Torah to prove that slavery was not only legal but was ethical. And that's an abhorrent thought to me. But that's something you can do when you use the Torah, the biblical text, as ammunition to back up your preconceived idea rather than looking to it truly for guidance. I think that cheapens the word of Torah. So, how would you take a specific example like driver's licenses for undocumented Americans or undocumented individuals from a Torah perspective?
Well, I'll always come back to the Torah. But I think that some of the values that are Jewish are also just civil rights and humanistic values and universal values. We want everyone to have shelter over their head. We want everyone to have food. We want everyone to have access to healthcare. We want everyone to be able to be safe and seek shelter. And so I know that in many ways we do enact those values as a community. Like, we have people come sleep in our synagogue for refuge in the winter. That's incredible. And I think that I agree with so much of what you're saying, that houses of worship need to be very careful in terms of how they position themselves. But I think that our duty, especially in taking care of those who are vulnerable. And of course, you can take any text, interpret it however you want. That's the nature of text. That's why it's powerful. That's why it's beautiful. That's why it's also sometimes dangerous. But how do we make sure that people are treated with dignity? How do we make sure that people are kept free? How do we make sure that people who are not a danger to others are protected in some way? I'm all for having rules and laws, and I am a rule abider and a law abider, sometimes to a fault. But when rules and laws don't keep people safe and wreak havoc and create chaos, and seem to be discriminant against a certain demographic to the extent where they're mistreated, I'm not talking about just rounding up people who are undocumented and making sure that they have proper legal status or taking them through due process. I'm talking about the abuse of people going through those situations. I'm talking about their families that don't know where they are. I'm talking about children that sometimes their parents are taken away. They don't even know where they are, and they have no access to the same systems that we have. And what I'm trying to say is that we live in a certain life of privilege, which I'm so thankful for. We worked so hard to have that kind of life. But it's so important for us to remember that, like, we were once Arameans as well. We were once wanderers as well. Life hasn't always been good for us, and just people have taken care of the Jewish people. We also have to take care of people. We also have to make sure that people are entitled to freedom. And so this is a discussion about immigration. This is a discussion about bigger discussion about people's freedoms and people's rights and their and how everyone deserves to be treated with a certain kind of dignity. And again, I agree that we have to be careful not to alienate, but we also think we have a responsibility to care about others and to live that life and to walk those steps and to talk that talk. And sometimes it's a little confusing, how to keep a community together, and also how to raise issues that are, I think, that are so pertinent and in need a voice.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that for me, a lot of this boils down to means versus ends. I think when you talk about the ends, the values such as people should have shelter, they should have food, they should have security. I personally, and maybe you think I'm not even saying this, I think that that's shared by both sides of the political aisle. I think it's most often a discussion around what are the means, the best means to do so. So if people should be able to
Agreed.
afford food. Does that mean there should be government-sponsored grocery stores in New York City, for example? People should have shelter. So does that mean that the New York City taxpayers should be paying for hotels to be established so that undocumented individuals coming, a lot of them bust up from the South, can come, and that the New York City taxpayer should be on the hook for that? To what extent should Westchester and other neighboring counties be on the hook for that? I think the devil is always in the details and has to do with the means to have this done. So let's take, for example, immigration for a moment. I think that you would find broad agreement with probably the entirety of our synagogue if we just said, for example, the current immigration system in America is broken. We have made it far too difficult for individuals who want to come to our country and to work here and provide a better future for their families to do so. And that because we've made it so difficult and our system is so arcane, that many do so not under legal pretenses, but without any negative motivation, but simply just to come here and during a time of a broken system. And both of us having married non-Americans and gone through the immigration process, I can tell you that if you can't afford a lawyer to work you through the system and have the basic education to go through it, it is incredibly difficult.
Incredibly.
And it is very unfair that way. And that, yes, we should completely change it. And I think that also we would all agree that the idea of going into places of work, raiding a place of work and pulling people who've been out of this in this country for years and have been working and
often paying
providing for their
taxes.
family. Yes. Oh, absolutely. The payroll taxes, absolutely, and contributing to our society, going into meat packing plants and rounding up hundreds of workers there who are doing jobs that other Americans don't want to do is unethical, a bad idea, all of these things. I think that there's things we absolutely agree on. I think that when you get to the nitty gritty, the driver's license example is a simple one in this. I think that becomes the issue. So I've always thought when I speak from the Bima, if I'm speaking from about an issue, there needs to be an action. What's going to be the action item from this? So I guess how do we frame the action item in something that, first of all, is actually possible to achieve? Right? I can give a sermon on the Bima about the immigration system in America being broken, and I don't see Congress changing that in the moment because I've said something about this, or even if every house of worship is saying something about this. How can we say that is actually achievable and something that you would have a broad consensus, not only within our synagogue, but around Jewish values?
So I don't think that you always need to have an action item. I think that sometimes you need to get people a little uncomfortable. I think it's
And just
important.
leave them there without something to do about it?
I think it's a process. I think that sometimes I think learning how to be uncomfortable in the world is a really, really important thing to know how to do. We don't always need that what's next. Because I think sometimes when you're uncomfortable, you will find it within yourself to find the what's next. But let's say that we do need an action item. And I've definitely given action item sermons, so I'm contradicting myself. I think that going back to the basics of what we're talking about, like we are not going to fix the politics of this country. We know that. But we can make life a little bit easier for the people who are going through these processes, who are going through these really scary moments. We can volunteer volunteer in the soup kitchens that support these people. We can somehow give pastoral support to the teachers who are dealing with students whose parents have been rounded up are in detention centers right now. So I'm thinking of, I agree, we are not experts. I'm certainly not an expert on almost anything. But I think that one of the things that we do so well in Judaism, beyond beyond being able to think deeply and to have nuanced conversations, is we are also deep carers. And I think that we need to use that, which has always been the forte of our community, is coming together for a cause. I mean, one of the things that I was moved by so much when I joined this community is the Thanksgiving meal prep, that we come together and we put together meals for thousands of people in Westchester. I mean, I couldn't believe those numbers, and it's in a community wide event, but I don't think that we necessarily need like a special day in order to do that. I think that sometimes maybe what we could do as a community and our role as leaders in the community is saying, like, we need to make that a part of our regular Jewish practice. Just like some people pray every day, what do we do every day that is making the world? I don't want to go into the cliche tikkun olam, but what are we doing to bring cohesion instead of division?
So can I push back on you for a second?
Please.
I think when it comes to dealing with current issues, there's two baskets. There is volunteerism,
Yeah.
and there's political activism.
Yeah.
The examples you're giving are from the volunteerism.
Yes.
And I don't think that anyone's disagreeing about the activism. I think we do a lot of the activism already, the volunteerism, excuse me, that we're talking about. We can go work at Neighbors Link. We can house people who need places to stay. We can work at the food bank. Those are all things that we're doing already. I think this is more specifically around political advocacy for specific political ideas.
You know, I think that I came in real hot and I'm like taking a step back from it, because maybe I am.
It's like our usual, like
Yeah.
you said in the mornings when you come in.
Maybe I am finding a little bit of discomfort in standing before people and telling them what they should think and how they should think, or being passionate about. I think it's okay that I'm passionate about an idea and that I can come and speak about it, but I'm in our conversation right now, and the way that in the way that we're having this conversation, I wonder. I'm like a little bit at a loss of words right now, because I'm just trying to figure out what I believe in. Like,
Can I give two examples? Can I
Yeah.
jump in as you think that? So, it's not to say that there has been no political advocacy on behalf of this synagogue. And I'm not, we could talk about Israel and anti-Semitism because that's the greatest examples. But I mentioned to you that when I first came to Bethel early on here, did a lot of advocacy along with Reverend Jacobs of First Congregational Church around affordable housing.
Right.
There was a lot of advocacy that went out here, and I wrote letters on behalf of that movement. And some of those that really got me into some hot water with some members of our congregation, but I felt that was an important thing to think about. And I still think today that if you look at the vast issues of inequality in America, housing is usually at the very top of the list. And we live in one of the most segregated parts of America in terms of housing opportunities. And I think we should be doing everything we can to make housing more affordable in our area. And I know that that's been a real issue in our community as well. You may remember the form-based code debate here. This was before your time here, but that was something that really was tearing apart the community in Chappaqua. But I'll give you a basic example now too. Several years ago, we put solar panels on our home.
Yeah.
Right. I believe that climate change is a real thing. I would like to do my part in trying to help with it. Seemed like a pretty simple thing to do. At the same time, it also saves me money in my electricity. I have spoken to several congregants about the benefits of solar panels. And I've had some congregants say to me, I don't like the way it makes my house look. It's an ugly thing to put on my roof. Now, at this point, should I turn to them and say, you know what? You're a bad Jew. Like, should I say to them, like, that's silly. The cosmetic look of your roof should not take priority over what should be a win-win for you both economically and environmentally. Should I get up at the high holidays and give a sermon that all of our congregants should put solar panels on their roofs?
Okay, I'm going to say what I want to say.
Please.
We're here for that. My issue, and I think that this is like maybe the elephant in the room. There's always many elephants in all the rooms, but there's certain issues that I think that are like really sitting I don't know if this is an Israelism, sitting on our chest.
Go ahead.
Okay, no, is that something you say in English?
Weighing on us, on
Weighing
our
on us.
shoulders. Go
Great.
ahead.
I always say the wrong thing. Is that there's some issues that we feel very comfortable talking about in terms of Israel, and we're not as comfortable bringing those issues here to the front in America. Meaning, we're very comfortable talking about the fact that Israel is engaged in anti-democratic acts right now in the terms of trying to fire the attorney general. We are not as and the reason that we are comfortable talking about certain ideas in Israel and values in Israel is because it does not apply to us. It is far away from us. And it's easy to talk about, like, look at this country and say, we love this place and we see that it is hurting itself in many ways. I think that we feel a little bit more uncomfortable saying similar things about what is going on in America, even though some people would find, oh, I see that we're getting started, seeing that there are similarities between how democracy is being played out there and how democracy is being played out here.
I disagree with you, not surprisingly. Even on the agreement about the attorney general example, in two ways. One,
wait, should we explain?
So recently, just yesterday, the Knesset formally moved to fire the Attorney General. This Attorney General has been having significant investigations into Netanyahu around corruption, among other things. And the Supreme Court immediately then held that decision. They created a stay for it to not occur until they review it. And this is one of those examples of why some members of the Knesset want to overhaul the Supreme Court overall, and even have begun some of the ways of doing it. But I want to say that we talk about coming from knowledge. You and I know more about what happens in Israel and how Israel works than most of our congregants. I don't think I would be able to say that about the US government.
I agree with
So, for example, most of our congregants don't know that, as opposed to in the US, the Attorney General in Israel is not chosen by the incoming prime minister the way it is here. And so to allow for the prime minister of Israel to appoint the attorney general would actually make it more similar to what we do in the US. I'm not entirely certain, when you're looking at different strings to pull in Israel, whether or not the attorney general shouldn't be chosen by the party in charge the way it's done here in the US. All I'm saying here is that I don't think it's apples to apples, because our congregants don't know nuances like that. Second of all, I do feel as though we criticize both and call balls and strikes when we see things happening in those communities. I think that actually, for me, it's easier for me to criticize the US because I feel like I know more about it than I do Israel. And maybe you feel more about Israel this way. But I want to go in a last direction, just kind of, we have to wrap up. Is there anything else I can say about this? I'm going to end with a happy note with a nechemta on top of this.
Bakasha.
There was a large period of my life where I felt like the era of congregants looking to their rabbis for guidance was over. That is, that there was a time in the first half of the 20th century where, when something happened in the world, you would go to the synagogue because you wanted to hear what the rabbi said on the bima. You know, when Stephen S. Wise spoke on the bima about what was going on, like, you went to go hear what was being said. When Jack Stern was speaking from the bima, Scarzo, you went to go hear what he said. And for a long time, I felt like that's no longer the case. And a lot of it has to do with the proliferation of really well-written and thought-out op-ed pieces throughout newspapers and now the internet and even to TikTok and such. So when something happens in the world, people will want to hear what Maureen Dowd and David Brooks and Brett Stevens have to say about it, and don't need to hear maybe what Rabbis Jaffe and Londy have to say. So I was at a point of my thinking that really, speaking as a rabbi about political issues, that era was sort of over altogether. And then I felt, oh my God, well, then am I basically just a Jewish game show host where I'm showing up here to basically be an MC for various rituals, but not say anything impactful or meaningful? Now, here's the but. But I've realized over the past couple of years that, especially when it comes to educating our congregation around Israel, which is, again, something you and I are able to speak to with a level of knowledge, and here I'll defer especially to you, having lived there for so long, that our congregants regularly reach out how much they appreciate the fact that you and I write and explain and advocate about what's happening in Israel. And it made me realize that I was wrong. Again, it's means and ends. It's not that our congregants don't want to hear what we have to say. It's that maybe the Friday night, Saturday morning sermon is not the way to reach them, because for a lot of our congregants, that is not their main attendance or meeting point with the congregation. But that kind of brings us to why we're doing this podcast at all, is because we wouldn't be speaking this way and putting out a podcast if we didn't think that our congregants would be interested in hearing what we have to say about these things. And so in some way, it has somewhat re-enlivened my rabbinate by realizing that, no, it's not that the congregants don't care what we have to say. It's that we have to look for the right medium in which to reach them. And whether it's writing emails to the congregation or now with podcasts, or for some with sermons, and certainly at the high holidays, that's the case, we have to be very thoughtful about the way in which we reach out to our congregants, because they do want to hear what we have to say.
I think that's true. And I'm always a little bit surprised by that when I write something that comes from a place of passion and processing, and then it resonates with other people. So I think that it is true that people are looking to hear from their Jewish community, especially now. I think so many people are kind of going back to the idea that synagogue and Jewish community has a lot of value in their life, and they're looking for that Jewish perspective. So I hold that, and I think that as well. And I'm not really finished with this. I'm not finished processing our discussion, because I think that you're right. In some ways, there's so many places to get the information that people are looking to get, and I just really think a lot about what needs to be said, who needs to say it, and what messages come out clearly and passionately, and what messages are silent, what messages we don't share. And that also is very loud. Silence can be very, very loud as well. So I really appreciate that this is the beginning of many more discussions to come about this. And I'm also really excited about the fact that this is a new way of accessing and opening up discussion with our community. We absolutely welcome feedback and discussion. I mean, like, that's the whole point of this, is we want connection, and we're seeking connection. And I think you and I, one of the things that I really resonates with your leadership and your rabbinate, in the way that I want to conduct myself as a rabbi, is you really think about what's the best for the community. So this is a to be continued discussion.
Of course.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us for the In Such a Time podcast. And thank you, Rabbi Londy, for joining me on this. And if you have topics you'd like us to take on, especially around current issues in further podcasts, please reach out to us over email and let us know.
And books we should read to prepare for that as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on In Such a Time. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. To learn more about Rabbis Jonathan Jaffe and Leora Londy, or to connect with Temple Bethel of Northern Westchester, visit bethelnw.org, or follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Temple Bethel NW. Thanks for listening.